think about this for a second. How something that sounds, well, kind of simple, like different parts of the world bumping into each other, can just set off this chain reaction. Changes nobody saw coming.
Mm-hmm.
Today, we're really going deep on maybe the biggest example of this in history, the Columbian Exchange.
Yeah, exactly. And it's so much more than just Columbus sailing west, you know?
Right.
What happened after that was this enormous, like, two-way street. Diseases, foods, plants, animals, all moving between the eastern and western hemispheres. It created this whole new level of global connection.
Okay, so that's our mission for this deep dive then. To really unpack the Columbian Exchange, we want to get at not just what happened, but why it happened.
Yeah, the drivers.
And the effects. The really deep, complex ways it just completely reshaped life, on both sides of the Atlantic. We'll be digging into historical accounts, analyses, trying to get a clear picture of this huge transformation.
And it's crucial to remember this wasn't some kind of equal trade-off. Not at all. It caused massive shifts, huge disruptions, and left legacies we're still, frankly, dealing with today.
Okay, let's start at the beginning then. What actually set this whole global reshuffle in motion?
Well, fundamentally, it boils down to European trade ambitions. We've talked about this before, right?
Sure.
This really strong drive in Europe to find sea routes, water routes to the East Indies. For spices, mainly.
Spices were the big thing. Pepper, especially.
Pepper was huge, yeah. A super valuable commodity. And that desire for spices, for wealth, drove a lot of this exploration.
Okay, so the spice trade is pushing exploration. And then Columbus comes into the picture, backed by Spain, looking for that western route.
Exactly. He's trying to get to the East Indies, but obviously bumps into something else entirely in 1492.
The Americas, continents totally unknown to Europeans.
Precisely. And that moment of contact, that unexpected encounter, that was the spark, the fundamental cause that kicked off the Columbian Exchange.
Once that connection was made.
Right. Once that bridge existed, this movement of organisms back and forth was almost, well, inevitable. And its effects, particularly on people, on populations, were just immense.
This is where it gets really intense, isn't it?
Yeah.
Let's talk about diseases, because it sounds like this was one of the first and maybe most devastating impacts.
Oh, absolutely. You have to understand. Afro-Eurasia, Europe, Africa, Asia, they've been connected by trade and, well, conflict for centuries, millennia even.
Okay.
So populations there had been exposed to a whole range of diseases over a very long time. They built up, some level of immunity, some resistance over generations.
But the Americas were different, much more isolated.
Completely different biological history, much more isolated. So tragically, yeah, the Americas were immunologically naive, you could say, very vulnerable in a way Afro-Eurasia wasn't.
So when Europeans arrived,
they unintentionally brought passengers, disease vectors we call them, things like rats on ships, mosquitoes, carrying illnesses the indigenous peoples had simply never encountered, zero immunity.
can you give us some examples? I mean, the specific diseases and the kind of impact they had, it's hard to picture the scale.
Sure. Well, malaria, for instance,
Yeah.
carried by mosquitoes that arrived, often with enslaved Africans. It caused just millions of deaths among indigenous people.
Millions.
Then there was measles, highly contagious, respiratory illness. It just ripped through denser populations. Again, millions dead. Catastrophic.
And the big one, smallpox.
Oh.
I read that was particularly horrific.
Yes, smallpox. It showed up early, maybe 1518, and it spread like wildfire. Mexico, Central America, down into South America.
And the death rates.
Just
Yep.
unbelievable. Overall, maybe half the population died from these new diseases. But smallpox alone, in some places, it wiped out up to 90%. 90.
90%.
It's why you hear the term the Great Dying from indigenous perspectives. It truly was an unimaginable loss of life.
Those numbers are just staggering. It really drives home the biological devastation.
Yeah.
Now, was there much disease flowing the other way, from the Americas to Europe?
That's a topic scholars still debate. There are theories like maybe syphilis originated in the Americas, but the evidence for a widespread, devastating impact from the Americas to Europe isn't nearly as strong as the other way around.
Okay. And what about the idea, the really disturbing one, that Europeans might have spread diseases on purpose?
Yeah, that's a question that comes up. It's obviously deeply troubling. But Looking at the historical evidence, there isn't really strong support for it being a widespread, deliberate tactic used systematically by Europeans on a large scale.
But intentional or not.
Intentional or not, the result was the same. These diseases, this great dying, just decimated indigenous populations. And that undeniably made it much easier for Europeans to colonize and take control of the Americas.
So it wasn't just a health catastrophe. It was a major factor in shifting the power balance between continents.
Absolutely fundamental.
Okay, let's shift gears a bit. From disease to, well, food, plants, and agriculture. Because the Columbian Exchange completely rejigged the global menu, didn't it?
It absolutely did, a total transformation. So Europeans brought their staples with them, things they were used to eating.
Like wheat, grapes.
Exactly. Wheat, grapes for wine, olives for oil. But they also brought crops that had already spread to Europe from Asia and Africa, things like bananas and, crucially, sugarcane.
And did indigenous Americans start eating these new foods?
Gradually, yes. Over time, many indigenous groups did incorporate some of these new foods. In some ways, it diversified their diets, which could be a benefit.
But the exchange went both ways, right? The Americas offered up some blockbuster crops to the rest of the world. I mean, try imagining Italian food without tomatoes or Irish history without potatoes.
Precisely. Key New World crops like maize, that's corn to mashed potatoes, manioc, also called cassava,
Right.
they traveled east.
And their impact in Europe.
Huge.
Yeah.
Especially after around 1700. These crops offered new sources of calories, often grew in places traditional European crops struggled. They helped diversify diets, made populations arguably healthier, more resilient.
Right.
Many historians argue they were a key factor in the big population growth Europe saw later on. More food meant people lived longer, basically.
And maize spread elsewhere, too.
Oh, yeah. Maize went to Africa, Asia, became a vital food source in many, many regions, really reshaped agriculture globally.
This movement of crops also ties into some major economic changes, doesn't it? This idea of cash cropping and plantations.
Yes, exactly. European colonizers weren't just bringing food for themselves. They quickly saw the Americas as having immense agricultural potential for profit.
Growing things to sell back home.
Right. Cash cropping, growing food not just to eat locally, but primarily for export, for sale in European or Middle Eastern markets. This led straight to the rise of huge plantations.
Usually focused on one valuable crop.
Often, yes, like sugar, tobacco, eventually cotton. These plantations were owned and controlled by Europeans, and crucially, they relied on forced labor.
Primarily enslaved people from Africa.
Primarily, yes. The scale of the transatlantic slave trade was directly linked to the labor demands of these plantations.
Can you give a specific example of how that system worked?
Sugar in the Caribbean is the classic tragic example. Growing and especially processing sugarcane is incredibly hard, backbreaking work. This labor was overwhelmingly performed by enslaved Africans under just horrific conditions. The sugar produced was then shipped off to Europe and the Middle East, generating vast fortunes for European planters and empires.
It's important to remember, too, that enslaved Africans brought their own foods and farming knowledge, right?
Absolutely.
Right.
It wasn't just a one-way imposition. They brought crops like okra and certain varieties of rice, which became important parts of American foodways, especially in the South. Their agricultural expertise was also vital, even if unacknowledged.
So from tiny microbes causing disease to the very food people ate, the impact was just immense. But it wasn't just plants and germs, was it? Animals were part of this exchange, too.
Yes, definitely. Europeans brought over their domesticated animals, pigs, sheep, cattle. These were new to the Americas.
And they thrived.
They thrived incredibly well. Often there were few or no natural predators for them in the Americas, so their population just exploded.
Which sounds like it could be good for settlers.
Well, yes, it laid the groundwork for the ranching economies that became so important later, especially in North and South America. Lots of meat, hides, wool.
But I feel like there's a but coming. Was there a downside, especially for indigenous people and the environment?
There absolutely was a big downside. You have huge numbers of these new animals, especially grazing animals like sheep and cattle.
Eating everything.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
They trampled native plants, compacted the soil, and led to significant erosion, especially in areas where indigenous farmers had developed, sustainable agricultural methods over centuries. It disrupted everything for them.
So environmental damage and disruption to traditional farming. But wasn't there one animal introduction that was perhaps more transformative in a different way for some indigenous groups? I'm thinking of the horse.
Ah, yes. The horse, absolutely. Its arrival fundamentally changed life for many indigenous peoples, particularly on the Great Plains of North America.
Oh, so.
Before the horse, hunting the massive buffalo herds was difficult, done on foot. Horses made them incredibly effective hunters.
Mobility, speed.
Exactly. It revolutionized their ability to follow the herds hunt successfully.
Mm.
Buffalo were central to their cultures: food, shelter, tools, spiritual life. The horse gave certain groups a new kind of power and changed their whole social structure.
So looking back at all this diseases, food, animals, it's crystal clear the Columbian exchange was way more than just, Columbus showing up and some stuff getting traded.
Oh, far, far more. It was kicked off by that European push for exploration, sure. But what it unleashed was this massive, complex, two-way transfer.
Mm-hmm.
And the consequences were just profound. Demographics completely altered, agriculture rewritten globally, even the physical environment changed on both sides of the Atlantic. Lasting effects.
It really does feel like one of those major turning points in world history, this sudden, intense connection between worlds that have been separate for so long.
Absolutely, a true watershed moment, forging these new global links, reshaping the planet in ways that still echo today.
So maybe something for you, the listener, to think about. Next time you're at the grocery store or cooking dinner, just maybe pause and consider. How many items on your plate actually trace their history back to this huge exchange hundreds of years ago?
Yeah, or even think about, our modern vulnerability to global pandemics. Does it connect back somehow to these very early patterns of contact, disease spread, and global interconnectedness that started way back then?
That interconnectedness, forged by the Columbian exchange, it's definitely still shaping our world.